Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 4 of the On Deck podcast. I'll be your host, Roberto Pegliero, and today we're going to cover some news coming out of spring training through the first week. First off, I'd like to discuss kind of an interesting and very head-scratching move, and that is the Astros re-engaging in the Nolan Arenado trade talks. And just right off the bat, having that Kyle Tucker trade that brings in both Cam Smith, very highly touted third base prospect in the Cubs system at the time, was just recently drafted, but also getting back Isaac Paredes in that trade, who I think is going to absolutely rake, especially in Minute Maid Park, and absolutely destroy those Crawford boxes because he is a very, very pull-happy player and was very dependent on, pulling everything to that strong pull side, especially in Tampa Bay. And now that wall is just going to be even closer for him in Houston. But after getting those two guys, there's not really a need for Arenado. Like you could move Paredes over to second base, and that kind of works in the Astros' favor because they do have Altuve taking reps in left field, which to me kind of makes sense and kind of doesn't make sense, because if you put him in left field, you can put Jordan at the DH full time and kind of save his health, because he's had issues with his knees, because I think both of them have been surgically repaired through the last couple years. So getting him off of his feet and just focusing on DHing, I think that could really unlock him as a hitter. But I don't think this Arenado move really makes sense for the team. And also, if they didn't want to pay Bregman, I don't think they would want to pay that Arenado deal unless the Cardinals are paying a majority of that contract, because as it stands right now, that contract isn't looking good, especially for the production that you're kind of expecting from a Nolan Arenado. That also goes without the fact of saying who else would you also package in that deal, because I don't think the Astros would just want Arenado. Maybe you throw in a minor leaguer within your 10 to 15 range prospect wise, but also what's the Astros return? Who would you trade in that sense? Because their outfield depth is very, very thin. I'm not sure how their prospects rank within the top 100 and all that, but I don't really think they have the prospect capital to give the Cardinals back what they need to get this trade done. And if you remember correctly, Nolan Arenado actually vetoed this trade to the Houston Astros earlier in the offseason. So to me, it doesn't make much sense of what either team is trying to do here, because if it didn't work the first time earlier in the offseason, what makes you think that it's the right move to make now? In my opinion, if I was the Astros, I wouldn't take this deal too seriously. I'd say if you're asking for a Cam Smith back who, just recently hit 2 home runs in the spring training game. Yes, I know, it is spring training, but still, seeing the potential that he might have in an Astros uniform, and who knows if, you can run him out at second base, have a position change. If you see what you like from Paredes, you can sign him to an extension long term, then have Altuve seriously take over that left field position, which is still something that blows my mind. And then you still have Mauricio Dubon, in that super utility role, filling in when, Altuve needs a day off, or even giving Christian Walker a day off at first. Anywhere that, Mauricio Dubon can slot in, be a decent enough glove, and not be a total black hole at the plate. He'll give you league average offense, maybe slightly above, maybe a 101. 102 WRC plus. Not expecting too much, but being a serviceable bat to slot in when guys need a day off. But now moving on to some National League news and more bad news coming from the pitching side in the Mets organization. Sean Manaea has been diagnosed with a lat strain, almost the exact same thing that Frankie Montas has been dealing with the last week or so when the report had come out. But yikes. The two guys that you really went out to go and pay this offseason haven't even thrown a single inning in a spring training game. And they're going to be out for a decent amount of time. If it's anything like Montas' lat strain, he's going to be out, that 6 to 8 weeks, and that pushes them into mid-May, maybe depending on how many rehab starts he gets, or, if there's a slight setback, that could be into June. And for a guy, that the Mets were really, really expecting big things from after some mechanical changes, that what they had talked about a lot with him was changing up his arm slot, getting into more of that Chris Sale crossfire action, changing up his pitch mix, throwing a lot more change-ups, sinkers and sweepers, and seeing success with that. So, yeah, really bad news coming from the Mets department with that. And these are two guys that were going to be a big piece of the rotation. Now you're headlined by Senga at the 1, and now you have a bunch of question marks in Griffin Canning, Clay Holmes transitioning into a starter from a guy in the bullpen. Even though he did throw, those 3 perfect innings in his spring training start, really showed off the new kick change. He threw a couple cutters, really showing that, he has the arsenal now, along with that bowling ball of a sinker, the good sweeper, slider mix, but also adding that cutter and kick change for, something that can attack righties a little better. It's going to be an interesting look to see how he performs and honestly how many innings he puts up too, because him, Blackburn coming off an injury, I had talked about that before when the Montas news had broke out. They have a bunch of question marks health-wise in that rotation, and now it just got a lot thinner with those 2 big names on the IL for the foreseeable future. They definitely have arms that, are able to do spot starts. They have a Jose Butto. They have Tyler McGill, who at one point was a starter and then due to injury got kind of transitioned into a bullpen role. So is he the answer to these starting pitcher injuries? I'm not too sure, but we will see a lot of Griffin Canning, Paul Blackburn. You will see a lot of David Peterson. I kind of forgot about his name in this mix, but again, these aren't guys that you necessarily feel confident giving the ball to for starts, in my opinion. This could be a possibility for guys in AAA to step up, or at least, have a greater possibility of making the opening day roster. I think now that the injuries that have hit this rotation so hard, I think that the Mets are just going to have to out-slug and out-hit everybody because, you do have the offense with Soto headlining, of course. You have Lindor, Alonso, Vientos. Those guys are going to mash. Alvarez, too, who I think is going to have a big bounce-back year. But with all the question marks in their pitching and even their bullpen, who I still think has a lot of question marks, are just going to have to outscore everybody because I think their pitching is going to give it up. Because realistically, how many times are you going to expect the same Stanek, Butto, Edwin Diaz? How many times can you realistically count on those guys in a row without one of them having a blow up? It's it's inevitable at that point because you're running them into the ground, and for those 6 to 8 weeks for Montas to come back, and hopefully the same goes for Manaea when they come back. That's a lot of innings that those guys are going to be eating up. And yes, I get, it's earlier in the season, and if the Mets are making that playoff push, you can rest those guys up and have their arms ready to go for the postseason. But at the same time, you always run into the risk of injuries with either three of those big names in that bullpen. And if you lose one of them, you don't really have someone else that's going to be able to step up in those high leverage situations. But for the sake of the Mets, I hope that someone is able to step up internally. Maybe, who knows, they go make a trade before the season starts. If someone gets DFA'd or, only was on a minor league invitee contract and, the team didn't necessarily like what they saw, but, the Mets are willing to take a flyer on that guy, and hopefully they can eat up some valuable innings for them for those 6 to 8 weeks until, Montas and Manaea are able to come back and really give that Mets rotation the boost that they really need. Now, jumping over to the other big dog in the National League, and that's with the Dodgers. And Rōki Sasaki, pitched a sim game against some of the White Sox minor leaguers and didn't really go as we had all expected him to throw. With the first batter him facing was Kyle Teal, and he was just recently acquired in that Garrett Crochet deal with the Red Sox. And the second pitch that he saw from Sasaki, he launched into right field. Yeah, not an ideal start to Sasaki's day, but he did settle down in that first quote-unquote inning by striking out one batter, the final batter of the inning, and then having a 3-up, 3-down in the second inning. But then in the third, it kind of unraveled for him. He did give up a few hard-hit balls to some of the White Sox players, but also issuing 2 walks. So was kind of all over the place in this first quote-unquote game. But there's a lot to take away from this game, so let's break it down. My first initial thoughts were, I think he was just extremely nervous, pitching for the first time, especially with all the hype and publicity that he's been getting this whole offseason, from him being posted to him eventually signing with the Dodgers. That whole sweepstakes was a lot to take in for, such a phenomenal pitcher at such a young age. And I think for him, it was just a little bit of performance anxiety that first time on the mound. It's a different ball to a whole different atmosphere that he's pitching in, even though, it's a backfield game. So there obviously isn't that same atmosphere as, the fans cheering you on, screaming, hearing those vendors, all the sound effects, from strikeouts to hit home runs, all that stuff. But I do think Sasaki will be successful in his first spring training start, having already worked out those jitters and the nerves from pitching to the White Sox minor leaguers who, aren't, MLB caliber hitters, but at the same time, getting that feel for the ball again, having that adrenaline pumping. And I think he can be really successful at the major league level. The real question is, how many innings are the Dodgers going to let him pitch? With him having come off of, some arm issues in the past when he was in Japan with the Chiba-Lotte Marines. So, being a little bit cautious at that point on the Dodgers side, which seems to be like their whole rotation, with Glasnow having not thrown over 130 innings ever in his career. Yamamoto with the injury last year, which I do think was it was a little odd, especially because he's been so healthy when he was in Japan pitching. So I kind of think it was a mix of a fluke, but, also coming over to the United States, we do things a little different here in the MLB compared to the NPB. You have Ohtani coming off of Tommy John. He will definitely be on an innings limit. You also have guys like Tony Gonsolin, Dustin May. Obviously, you have Kershaw, who you always want to keep in good shape for when the playoffs come around. Never really pitches too much in the regular season, but always makes himself available come playoff time, or at least tries to. But there's a lot of question marks in that rotation too, health-wise, because they did have some guys go down too last year, like River Ryan, Gavin Stone, who was pitching really well and honestly was the only consistent arm that was coming out every fifth day until he went down with unfortunate season-ending shoulder surgery. So, but bringing it back to Sasaki and this quote-unquote outing, I don't think this is, how his major league season is going to play out with him giving up hard contact, not really striking too many guys out like he was in the MPB, and having this control issue. I think he's going to be still a very polished player, but also not at his full potential yet. And that is kind of scary for the rest of the league, because we know what Dodgers can do with that pitching lab. They're going to unlock something in Sasaki, and all I'm going to say is watch out, MLB, because if the Dodgers find anything with Sasaki that they're able to tweak a little bit, even give him another pitch instead of just being primarily, fastball, splitter, the occasional slider, probably going to change that slider into, a bit of a slower sweeper. And then he'll probably end up learning a cutter too. That's what personally I think the mix should be. But if the Dodgers are able to get what they get out of their pitchers, out of Sasaki, who's already disgusting, all I'm going to say is watch out, hitters, because that's not going to be a very long day in the box. But with that being said, that concludes today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you find your podcasts at. It is greatly appreciated. Share it with your friends. Anything to help support this podcast and get it out there to more and more people like myself who, just have that love for the game of baseball. It's greatly appreciated. And we'll be back very soon with some more news, some more topics, and maybe even an interview in the next podcast. See you guys.